Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We're going to continue with our next speaker, Eric Eggert. He's a web developer and accessibility educator. He's located in Essen, Germany. He's been working for the W3C Web Accessibility Initiative from 2013 on. And since 2016, he also works for the Austin-based nonprofit Nobility. Eric, take it away. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So yeah, it's very early here in Germany, so at least for me. If I am not audible at some time, I'm probably sipping on my coffee, just so you know. Yeah, welcome. This is my talk called ARIA Series, where I will take a look at ARIA and what people are doing right and doing wrong. I'm based in Essen, Germany, which is right here on the map. I don't know if my awesome. Right here in Germany, in Europe. I'm a web accessibility specialist at Nobility, where I do assessments and training and stuff like that. And 50% of my time goes to W3C as a fellow, which is an awesome opportunity to continue my work there. And I have a brief little disclaimer before the talk. This presentation contains ARIA examples that are preventing websites and applications from being totally accessible. So don't copy and paste anything from those slides. I usually try to not do that, but in this instance, it's just a fair warning. And yeah, it's just so you know, don't just take everything for granted. So talking about WAI-ARIA, what is that? It's called ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications, and the important thing in there is the term Internet applications. So ARIA is in the beginning not meant for being used much on traditional websites, in air quotes. So it creeped its way into more traditional applications or more traditional websites in the last few years. But the roots, the initial generation of ARIA was aimed at internet applications, so web applications, basically. There are some rules of using ARIA, and they are in the quite awesome notes on using ARIA in HTML document. It's a very short but very insightful document that's on the W3C site. And I can open that up. Oh, and it just moved, of course, to a new repository, so I have the wrong link in there. I will change that for publication of the slides. So that's the using ARIA in HTML, and it has all the rules of ARIA and stuff like that, and I will go into them a bit. But if you want to dig deeper into the different issues, it's a good start. So the first rule of ARIA use is if you can use a native HTML5 element or attribute with the semantics and behavior you require already built in, instead of repurposing an element and adding an ARIA role, state, or property to make it accessible, then do so. So if you have an HTML5 element that does the same thing, then use that HTML5 element. That's the first and basic and most important rule of using ARIA. And this ensures that you have backwards compatibility, that stuff is built in, like using the keyboard with buttons, for example. The second rule of ARIA use is do not change native semantics unless you really have to. And I got an example here, and this is where we get into like bad examples. Don't use that. Here, this is an H1 with a role button, which should be, which the designer or creator of that code thinks, oh, well, I need a heading that is also a button, so I will have an H1 role button. But that's actually really bad. Don't do that, because this actually means that this H1 is only a button. It won't show up in screen readers. If you have your headings listed, there is no indication that this is a heading anymore because you changed the role from heading to button. And this basically breaks your whole navigation or your whole intent of using this. The better or more correct way is to have a button element inside of an H1. Then it can serve as both a heading and a button. And that's much, much better. The third rule of ARIA use is that all interactive ARIA controls must be usable with the keyboard. And rules for that. So it's not just like, oh, I just make it somehow keyboard accessible. No, there are rules and like very specific things you have to look into when you are making a custom ARIA control, when you're using ARIA, especially if there is no element or if it element. So for example, if you are using a role equals button, the element must be able to receive focus, and the user must be able to activate the action associated with the element using both the enter and the space key. I don't know how many button examples, ARIA button examples I've looked at where the space key does not do anything or scrolls the page or just is not working correctly. So if you got a role button, you also have to make sure that this is working, that you can use the enter, the return key on Windows or Mac, and the space key as well. So you can't just do one or the other. That would not be complete support, keyboard support for this element. The fourth rule of ARIA use is do not use role presentation or ARIA hidden true on a visible focusable element, because that's just confusing. So if you're using your tab key and you go through a page and it has ARIA hidden on the element, it's just not there. So a screen reader wouldn't read anything, although visually there is a button or a link or some interactive element. And if you use role presentation, you might get to a link, but it would not be announced as a link, and that would be totally confusing. So just keep that in mind, that you shouldn't use role presentation or ARIA hidden true when there is an element that is visible and focusable. And in general, if you're using those roles or attributes, be careful. They can really break the page, and we're getting to that in a minute. The fifth rule of ARIA use is that all interactive elements must have an accessible name. So that means if you got a button, put a text on it. If you can't put a text on it, use a technique like ARIA Label or title or whatever you want to give it an accessible name. I always want to say, if you're using one of those techniques, make sure that the visible image or text or what have you, that is clear as well. Because even if it has an accessible name, it's accessible for screen readers, but people with cognitive disabilities might struggle with it if it's like an abstract icon or something like that. And if you just write out the example, if you just write out the label of the button, it's much clearer and easier to use for everyone. there is a problem with ARIA support. So not every aspect of ARIA is supported in every browser, and at times it's really hard to support it. There has been an article by Hayden Pickering called ARIA Controls is Poop Emoji, and it nicely shows where there are expectations, where there are things that are implemented or that should be implemented or that are half implemented and therefore are not too useful. And I want to quickly go into that example. So if you look at ARIA Controls, you got a button that and then you just have an ARIA Controls attribute on them, which references an ID of the expandable, in this case, region. So we got a button with ARIA expanded false, and then you got ARIA Controls expandable, which is the ID, and the button has open close on as the label, and then you got div ID expandable, and you have that hidden, and you can show that as you like. So that's all well and good. So basically what this does, it connects the button to the expandable area. So that means even if you have a lot of other markup, including interactive elements inside of the focus order between those two areas, between the button and the expandable area in this case, you still have the connection. That's the general plan. That's the general gist of the of what this should do. So you can hit the button, the expandable floats out, shows up, and then you can set the focus to the expandable, and a screen reader user or keyboard user should have an easy way back to the button where they come from. So they can, for example, show other things or just know where they have been. Now, the support is not really there. So JAWS is supporting it, but every other screen reader is not really supporting it, or basically not supporting it. And I don't know of any other assistive technology that uses that. So although this is a technique that's specifically meant for people use it with assistive technologies in mind, people using assistive technologies in mind, there is actually little support for that, although it would be in theory useful. So what happens in JAWS if you focus an element with the attribute included? JAWS will announce to press the JAWS key plus Alt and M to move to the controlled element, which is a bit verbose and clumsy, and I'm quoting Hayden there. Then again, I'm not sure how else you'd go about supporting it, but that's not the only problem. How in the hell do I move back? And even if I could, how would that be communicated? And how long should the option to move back remain active? No wonder the other screen reader vendors are giving this a wide berth. So the thing is, you can move to the controlled element, but then you can't get back in JAWS. That's really not a good approach. It's really not as useful as you would think when you are reading the specification. But there's even more that complicates this. So you can use ARIA Controls for one element, but you can also use it for multiple elements. So in this example, I got ARIA Controls for element 1, element 2, element 3, element 4. So now where does the cursor move if I use ARIA Controls, if I use the JAWS keys? How does that make sense to the user when I'm using this? Again, they could have like a list presented with the different elements and where to go using ARIA. There could be some kind of way to make that transparent, but it looks like a lot of work or a lot of things that need to be considered and that are probably not spec'd out as they should be. So what to do? Same page links move the user from one part of the interface to another, so you can use them. Landmark roles encapsulate major areas of the interface functionality that helps to navigate through it. So if your target, your expandable, has a landmark, and if the controller has a landmark, you can get from one to the other relatively easily. And then you got expandable areas that come immediately after their ARIA expanded controllers in the source and in focus order, which is the most basic thing, the most easiest thing. You click, you have a button, and you expand the area, and then you tap again, and you're immediately inside of that area, which is how it should be, and which is the easiest way to do it. And the thing is, WAI-ARIA is really, really complicated. So in the background of the slides, you see like an SVG graphic that has all the pointers and connections of the different ARIA controls, and it really looks like a spider web. It's really, there's really a lot going on, a lot of dependencies, a lot of things working together. So there is a lot to consider. So it is a complicated specification to implement for browsers, for assistive technologies. And that means it's also complicated for web developers. And I got a few exhibits here that show relatively bad examples and how to make them better for everyone. So this is exhibit 1. It's an airline logo. It is a link to the homepage of that airline. It has an ID of airline-logo, a class of logo, and an ARIA label, which has the airline name, and then the rest of the link is empty. That technically is a totally valid thing to do. You can do that. It's not a violation of WCAG or something that is problematic for assistive technology as such, but it's also a backwards way to do stuff, because you got the actual logo as a background image, so you don't have alternative text. The alternative text is replaced by the label. It's using ARIA for ARIA's sake at some point. So while this is totally okay and you can do that, it's not one of the best uses for ARIA, because ARIA is not supported in some assistive technologies. There is some weird stuff with speech input. When you have speech input, some ARIA stuff is just not properly recognized. So in this case, maybe someone couldn't use the home link, and that would be bad. And so you should go and use like more standard, more direct techniques of doing it. For example, just using an image with a source and an alternative text inside of the link. That would be totally good. You can also use an inline SVG with a title. That would be well supported as well, and you can use that to navigate, and it's much more direct. Your alternative text is like more in the HTML. At least that's how I feel it, and it's less likely that someone takes that code and changes something without changing the alternative text for that image. So the second exhibit that I have here is a list of links that basically move slides around. So you got slide 1, slide 2, slide 3 as links. And in there you got a span class hidden text that basically hides the slide, and then you get a link, and that link is a standard HTML link, so it's the A element, and it has an href value of JavaScript void 0, because they did not want to change sites, obviously, when you pages when you click on them. Then there is a class that's called nav inactive or nav active, and then this whole A element is using role equals button to designate it as a button to screen readers. So that's the basic gist of the HTML, and this all is like enclosed in a div, wrapped in a div that has the class nav. So it looks like relatively straightforward HTML, but we can obviously do better. So the better versions are that you get a nav element. So this brings with it a role of navigation, and makes this navigation, this slide navigation, findable by assistive technologies. You got the 3 buttons as button elements, and then you can use ARIA selected equals false or ARIA true instead of using a class to designate if this button is selected. And then you can use ARIA labels to say slide 1, slide 2, slide 3. It says slide 4 in the slide, but you get the gist. And use non-breaking spaces or empty button elements in there. But of course here the same thing goes as with the airline logo before. It would be much better to have an image in there, or to have some other thing in there that indicates the slide that is selected or not. But theoretically you can do that with an empty button element. Better is using just images and be considerate. And now when you get through the buttons, so first it will say this is a navigation. If you really want to, and you probably should, you can put an ARIA label on the nav element. So this navigation is labeled as slides navigation or slider navigation, something like this, because that makes it distinguishable from other navigation elements website, which is always a good thing. Another thing that I recently saw as a thing that where the developer thought they do the right thing and really thought that through and tried to use an advanced technique, is this one. It's a table header cell, and it has some attributes which are tab index equals 0. So it's tappable, so you can actually use your keyboard to get there. Also, it has role equals button, which makes this table heading a button. And then you got ARIA label equals sort column, although the actual text that is displayed is name. So this does several things. So first, it uses a TH, a table header cell, as a button, which is not what should happen, because it just alters the semantics of that element, and then it actually changes the name, the accessible label, from name to sort column, because when you're using an ARIA label like that, it actually overrides what is inside of the element. So when I use a screen reader to go through the different rows or columns where this TH is, it does not say this is the name column. It actually says this is the sort column. And that makes no sense at all. So while thinking they do the right thing, it actually can backfire, and you can override your actually accessible name using ARIA label, and therefore, basically put all your effort that you put in there into the trash. What you should do is using the name as the TH and then add a button to the table header cell that sorts the column. So this is another one that came up recently, where there was a span which displayed an icon because it did some, I don't know, either it was like a background image thing or like a icon font thing. But nonetheless, they used the span and then they added ARIA hidden true to it. So don't show this span. But they actually gave a role image to it as well. So this is an image that should not show up. So this makes little sense because if you're actually adding a role image, you want people to know that there's an image there. If you then immediately set it to ARIA hidden equals true, that might look like it's more semantically correct, but actually it just says, oh yeah, this is an image, but we don't want anyone to read that. So this is probably an issue where it's not really bad, but what is the point of doing that? You could just use the ARIA hidden true, and if you don't have text inside of the span anyway, and that can differ with icon fonts, that's true, you probably do not need any of those attributes, neither the ARIA hidden attribute nor the image attribute, to just have this span not be spoken in your in your screen reader or what have you. So empty spans are usually just ignored. As for the next exhibit, this is a really bad example that I picked up. And just to get you in the mood and to get you imagine on where this came up. So imagine there is a model dialog over a page. So you want to have the tab order be enclosed in that model dialog. You want screen readers to not pick up on anything that is behind the model dialog. And you want to just be sure that this happens. So what I found was this. It's a body element and it has ARIA hidden true on it. So when you are doing this, the whole page is hidden. So this is actually, or has been, part of a framework that shows model dialogues and does other things. And so what they did is, on the body they put ARIA hidden true, and then further down where the model dialog is, they put ARIA hidden false. So the thing is, this does not work. If you have ARIA hidden false element inside of an ARIA hidden true element, it's still not hidden. It's still not there because it's this is nothing that happens once something is hidden. That has precedence basically for everything that is in there. So screen readers, when you open the dialog, screen readers don't announce anything anymore, but you have tappable things inside of the dialog box. So that goes back to our third rule of ARIA use, where you don't have ARIA hidden true if you have something that is in tab order inside of that. And this is exactly what is happening there. So this is really, really bad, really confusing stuff for screen reader users. All the interactive elements are not available to other assistive technologies as well. So don't do that. This is really putting the baby out with the bathwater. So, and here I got another one that was really recently when I saw that. There was a link. It opened in a new window, which was fine. It has a title of "Click here to view the video." It had a tab index of -1 because of some shenanigans of the page, which was okay in that context. But really, if you have a link, it should be have at least a tab index of 0. And it had a roll button, which made that link a button again. And then the ARIA label external link. So what the developer actually thought they would be doing was saying, okay, this is a link that opens in a new window. So it probably shouldn't be even a role equals button. So I would not use that. And it has a title, click here to view the video, and it's an external link. So we use ARIA label to designate that this is an external link. So what happens in assistive technologies is that the title, click here to view the video, is completely overwritten by the ARIA label. So this only says external link. This is not useful at all. And it's even less useful if you have like 20 or 30 links on a page, which this example had. So it was like when you read through it using a screen reader, it was like external link, external link, external link, external link. Some of those were even like inside of a sentence. So it replaced the link text with external link. And that basically made the website unusable for every screen reader user. And stuff like that is just painful to see. So whenever you have a link, and especially if you have text in the make sure that you don't use ARIA label unless you really, really have to, because it overrides things. What they should have done is using ARIA described by to say, okay, this is an external link. Then they just had like one ARIA described by element that they reference from all the links, and where they could change the text easily as well. So that was one of the more horrendous things that I've seen, where it's just, the thing is, when people read ARIA and they read accessible rich internet applications, they sometimes think this is a magic wand. I just put ARIA fairy dust on it and it will be accessible. And that's not the case. So you have to get some background and know how things work, play together with screen readers, with other assistive technologies. That was coffee. So there are multiple components of ARIA, and this goes back into stepping back and taking a look at ARIA and just seeing and understanding what this actually is. So the components are roles, states, and properties, and managing focus. And instead of managing focus, we could rather say keyboard interaction. And a lot of the roles are already incorporated into HTML5. So if you're using like a main element or a navigation element, a nav element, that's all there. You don't need to really sweat over it, which is awesome, because we want this those techniques to be used by a variety of people. Everyone should be able to use them. And putting that stuff into HTML5 makes it more quote unquote accessible to developers, and that's really awesome. And then you got the states and properties. Some of those are in HTML, like the hidden attribute is in HTML. Looks like ARIA hidden equals true, but it also does not show. So you got that second layer of control there. If you want to make this element not visible at all, or you just want to hide it from screen reader users because it's superfluous and you don't really use it or need it to understand the page. And then there is the keyboard interaction part, and that's essential. So if you're using an ARIA component, basically what you need to do, especially if they are more complicated, you need to implement every keyboard shortcut, every keyboard click, everything from the ground up. There is nothing built in. If you put button on a div, this is not keyboard accessible by default. And many forget that, or they put just on click on it, and it works with enter but not with space, as I described before. But because this is a W3C specification, ARIA, there is actually a really good resource for learning what the different components are, what you have to do. And that's the WAI-ARIA Authoring Practices Guide. They are continuously publishing editors' drafts, and this is the WAI-ARIA Authoring Practices Guide 1.1. And what this does, you can actually pop out the sidebar, and you got all the design patterns and widgets in there. So, which is really cool, like 27 different widgets. And then you got landmark roles in there, how to use them. And then you have developing a keyboard interface, which is keyboard interaction, in there as well. And this has more information on intentionally hiding semantics with the presentation role. So it's a really good and really really interesting document. And if you are using ARIA in your workflow, make sure to read that and understand it, because this is the basic. This is how users expect things to work, or should expect things to work. Sometimes that's not really clear, because they are not used to seeing ARIA widgets or design patterns on websites. So, for example, if you got a menu or menu bar, I will jump to that because I had some. I did something with that. If you use that on a normal website, users probably don't expect that here. They expect that in an in quote-unquote internet application, and not on a normal website. And the thing is, first, there are all the rules of what you can do and what you need to nest into what element, and how a menu bar actually works. So it's a bit like HTML there, but with ARIA roles, and then you need to take a look at the different keyboard navigation things. So, for example, when you hit enter and the focus is on a menu item, then and that menu item has a submenu, you open the submenu and place focus on its first item. Otherwise, it activates the item and closes the menu. So the same goes with space. There is, if you hit space, there are a few rules, but all are optional. So only if you use stuff, but usually you should at least consider implementing that. Then you got rules for down and up arrow, for the right arrow. So there's this whole really like involved interaction pattern that there is this whole interaction pattern that people probably don't really expect from a menu bar on a normal website. And that can be hard for them to understand. So, and then you got role states and properties, and it's explained in detail as well. So the W3C has published a tutorial on that. I just open that in a separate window. So that's at w3.org/way/tutorials. And then you click on menus, and there's an application menu and code example. And there's also a descriptive page that that shows how things need to be nested and how the keyboard behavior is. And there are like handy tables that show you what needs to be done. And one of the things that ARIA requires is that if you use the tab key and you come to one of those application menus, you actually can't leave the navigation menu until you hit the escape key. And that is currently broken in this example because I missed something copying it over. But when you are inside of that menu, it basically wraps around whenever you hit the tab key. You are supposed to stay in that menu because that's how it always worked with desktop menus. And that can be disorienting for users and hard to understand. So if you have an application that's probably okay, like something like Gmail or some of those really involved web applications, they are probably okay with using such patterns. But if you have like a standard normal content website, people think they can just move through the menu items by using tabs and then also get to the next thing in tab order using the tab. And this is not true for those ARIA menus because that's not how they work. I just look at sorry for scrolling here. I will just look at a more simple example for this behavior. So if we go back to the button, or more simple example for buttons, so you can see how the anatomy of such an entry in the ARIA best authoring practices is. You got a button, pretty neat description on what this is, keyboard interaction, which is much shorter than with the menu. So you can read through that and then use your JavaScript accordingly. And then there are the role states and property, which outlines a few of the properties or all of the properties that can be added to a button. And then there are examples on the page, and they are using clickable diffs and spans, and you just don't do it. Just use the button element. But you can use ARIA pressed, for example. Or you can use ARIA described by to add a description. You can use all of the ARIA stuff, but in the end, if you're using a button, use a button. Another shout out to the using ARIA
Just letting you
specification.
know your time is almost up, Eric.
Yep, I'm wrapping up. Thank you. Which have the ARIA use stuff, and you can just look into that and read through that. So those are the two mandatory reading things that you get for homework, is the WAI-ARIA authoring practices and the using ARIA document, and then you should be good using ARIA. And that's it. Thank you very much. You can find me at Yatil, YATIL, on the internet. YATIL.net is my blog, and you can find the slides at slides.com/YATIL/2017-ID24. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric. That was a great presentation. We got a few minutes for questions. So far, everybody on Twitter seems to agree with pretty much everything that you've said, so there's a lot of confirmations and retweets. I had a few questions myself. First of all, you mentioned to avoid using ARIA hidden and the presentation role for content that has focusable elements in it. And I was wondering, how strict are you on that? Because I can imagine situations where you have a very cluttered site, for example, which this happens to be the design of that site, and the developers can't really change that. And for example, you would have a lot of redundant links next to each other. Sometimes you have like a thumbnail link and then followed by exactly the same link, but it's a text link associated. So you have two links now, two tab stops. Obviously, that's poor design, but one quick fix for that could be to add a ARIA hidden attribute on the second link and remove it from the tab order with a tab index attribute. Would you find that an acceptable way to declutter screen reader output and the tab order for users?
Yeah, so if you are using a negative tab index, so it's not actually a tabbable element, then you can do that. So that's acceptable. It's still not the optimal solution, obviously, right. But we are not living in an optimal world, so I'd give that a pass. Although it's better to just declutter your code, because
it's far from ideal.
But yes, that's an okay technique to use.
I just told a client to do that when they refused to change their design, so it's good to know.
Clients are the worst.
The other thing that you mentioned was ARIA Controls. There's been a lot of talk about that it's currently not very well supported or not very useful. What do you think we as an accessibility community can do about that? Like, do we need to be more strict with assistive technology vendors of what the expected behavior is, or do we need to rely on them to make this decision themselves?
Yeah, I think we have a bit of a challenge in terms of that we are demanding a lot from web authors, so from people actually doing websites, but we don't have like a strict requirements from browser vendors, or some things are just not well defined. So like the idea of having ARIA control, and that's actually in accessibility APIs in operating systems right now, but the idea is good, but the execution lacks, and probably it's not as well specified as one would want to have it. So
Eric,
that's bit of a problem.
Sorry, I was just saying, do you think it would be useful for ARIA at the moment? The W3C ARIA working group only tests for support in the platform accessibility APIs. It doesn't test for support in actual assistive technologies like screen readers. Do you think that would be a practical step that could be taken?
Yeah, I think being more open or more receptive of knowing what works where would be really, really important. I mean, we have HTML5 accessibility.com, which has all the HTML5 elements, and having something for ARIA that would be awesome as well.
Yep, that too.
All right, well, that's about all the time that we have. So thank you very much, Eric. And people can contact you if they have more questions. We'll be back in 10 minutes with some SVG accessibility goodness from Charles McCarthy-Neville. So thanks again, Eric, and I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. Talk to you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.